As the ice begins to thaw, pitchers and catchers transcend to their respective spring training sites in Arizona and Florida. Optimism is in the air. Perennial favorites hope their offseason additions were enough to push them over the World Series hump. Contenders hope to find that secret sauce to jolt themselves into a deep playoff runs. And bottom dwellers, they're looking to be this year's Cinderella run. Everyone is hopeful with one thing on their mind: the Commissioner's Trophy. Hello, my name is Avery Taylor, aka Gingic. I'll be taking you through my MLB season's predictions, awards, playoff predictions, World Series winner. It's all going to be happening right here, so make sure you guys stay tuned. Starting in the AL East, let's focus on last year's winner, the New York Yankees, who certainly had a loud offseason. Normally, signing Carlos Rodon would be the biggest move, but the Bronx Bombers outdid that expectation by re-signing Aaron Judge to a 9-year deal. They also combated their losses in the bullpen of Chapman and Green with signing Tommy Kahnle. Overall, it was a very good offseason for the Pinstripes, but I do think they are due for some regression. The team was very reliant on Aaron Judge, and that showed in the playoffs, when his bat was cold. While I love Judge as much as the next guy, replicating what he did last season would be near impossible. I have them finishing with a 2 games worse record at 97 and 65. Sticking in the Northeast, let's go to their bitter rival, the Boston Red Sox, who had one of the most confusing off seasons ever. First, they let their superstar shortstop go, Alexander Bogaerts, to the Padres, and to combat that, they signed a slew of free agent talent. Kenley Jansen, Corey Kluber, and Justin Turner all make their way to Fenway, as well as Japanese star Masataka Yoshida. However, in my opinion, the team got worse. While I do not think they will be fighting for the worst record in baseball bad, I think that they are the worst team in the division. And finishing with a 74 and 88 record will represent that. But hey, you re-signed Rafael Devers. Heading north of the border, we had the Blue Jays, who had a sneaky good offseason. I really like the additions of Bassett, Belt, and Green. I also really like the trade for Dalton Varsho. I think it did take some of the clog away at catcher that the team had anyway and improved their outfield. I really like what the team did in the offseason. They think they're clearly set to win right now, and I kind of agree with that. I had them finishing just behind the Yankees with a 95 and 67 record. I was not as aggressive as I may have liked to be, but I really did like their offseason. Heading to last year's darlings is the Baltimore Orioles. They had a disappointing offseason from my perspective. A few veteran pieces left in free agency, which will clear the way for younger guys in their loaded farm system. However, my issue is who they brought in and the lack thereof. Adam Frazier cannot be the biggest name brought in when the team is looking to take that next step from Cinderella story to contender. I think the team continues to improve, but I think they will not make the step outsiders want them to make. To finish the AL East, we had the most successful team, one of the most successful teams that takes the whole Moneyball approach to baseball, in the Tampa Bay Rays. Maybe it's just my personal vendetta against the teams that do not spend money to routinely improve their team, but I think the Rays are finally due for some regression. The team has been losing pieces progressively for years, and somehow they always find a way to magically fix whether it be internally or some no-name player they acquire. However, even though they prove me wrong almost every year, I have them finishing below 500 at 80 and 82. Another successful team that does not spend much money is our first team in the AL Central in the Cleveland Guardians. Once again, the team had a pretty quiet offseason, but they did make a couple of underrated moves in Josh Bell and Mike Zunino. I think both players have showed flashes of being elite players, and if both can be anywhere near the level they have shown, the team can really build off their last season efforts. Next, we had the most disappointing team of last season in Chicago White Sox. It really feels like they squandered their contending window, and now they're on the other side of it. The loss of Jose Abreu is a crucial one, and I cannot believe they let him walk. They did try to combat the issue by signing Andrew Benintendi to a 5-year deal, but I think the losses outweigh the gains. I think the team will end up with a losing record with a 78 and 84 record. Heading north to Minnesota, we have a team that had a relatively confusing offseason. A team that really needed some pieces to remain in the playoff hunt made a bunch of lateral moves. Yes, they finally ended the Carlos Correa fiasco, but they also traded away Luis Arias and Gio Urshela, who have been solid pieces for them over the past few seasons. They did gain Pablo Lopez out of the trade with the Marlins, but the rest of their incoming offseason additions are relatively underwhelming. I think this team is due for another step back. I really like to see teams move forward and push to be good, but I feel like this team is not any better than the team they were last year. Speaking of disappointing offseasons, can we talk about the Detroit Tigers? People were all over this team after last year's offseason, and they were met by disappointing results. So management decided to pretty much get rid of its existing core of the last few seasons. Jeimer Candelario, Gregory Soto, and Harold Castro all hit the road, and I think the win total is going to take a hit. I did find it humorous that Matthew Boyd found his way back to the Detroit after the team had swirling trade rumors for years. One of the few teams in the Central that I do not see taking a serious step back is the Kansas City Royals. Here we saw a team that really looked to invest in its current roster, and because of that, I think they will become this year's Orioles. A team that takes a massive jump behind their very young players, making a big impact. A team in this division needs to pick up the slack from the other teams losing more games, and I definitely think the Royals can fill that void with an 82-win season. Moving out west, we have last year's World Series winners in the Houston Astros. This team had a semi-noisy offseason, bringing in Jose Abreu and losing Justin Verlander. I think this team is set to return with another league-best win total, but I do think their total from last year is set to take a hit. The team will miss Verlander, and with the rest of the West getting better, I think that the win total will not quite break 100 wins this season. Stepping out next, we have the Tampa Bay Rays of the West and the Seattle Mariners. They have become the darlings of the MLB, breaking their MLB record 21-season drought. However, like the Rays, they have lost some pieces. They also brought in some talent, but I think that with the improving West, the Mariners are due for some more losses. I have the Mariners finishing at an 86-76 record for the season. Anaheim is next up on the docket, and I really liked their offseason. They had bringing in names Brandon Drury and Tyler Anderson. They also acquired Hunter Renfroe and Gio Urshela via trade, while only really losing Michael Lorenzen. It might not be the biggest names that the general public would like to see the Angels bring in, but it is improvement. Trust me, I would be the first to jump on the Angels bandwagon just because I want Mike Trout to be successful in a team environment, but there is just something about the Angels that always gives disappointing results, and I think this year is no different. I think Trout will once again miss the playoffs, but the record does see some improvement to 80-82. Everything is bigger in Texas, and so are the contracts. The Rangers have made possibly the biggest splash of the offseason, bringing in, when healthy, the best pitcher in baseball, Jacob deGrom. The Rangers also made considerable efforts to round out their staff, bringing in Nathan Eovaldi, Andrew Heaney, and Jake Odorizzi. I really like the offseason the Rangers had. I think they addressed their biggest weakness, and I think they are due for a serious increase in wins. Finally, we have the bottom dwellers of the last season in the Oakland Athletics. There is not a lot going on with this team. The owners do not want the team to be there anymore. It seems like the city really doesn't either. The roster itself somehow got worse with the trading of their best player in Sean Murphy. This team is not going to be good. I might honestly be generous with my prediction of 56 wins, but I think this team is set to take a beating in the AL West. Moving to the National League, let's take a look at the team that got the most regular season wins in the Atlanta Braves. I think it's very arguable to say the Braves are at a net loss in terms of value with the losses of Swanson, Jansen, and Duvall. However, I think the addition of Sean Murphy and the underrated signing of Nick Anderson are going to play a big role, as well as their reemergence of Ronald Acuna Jr. Acuna was not his normal MVP self last season, and a large part of that was him getting used to his body after the injury. Next year, he will return to MVP level form, and the team will improve its win total from last season to an MLB leading 104 wins. Let's talk about last year's National League World Series representative, the Philadelphia Phillies, who had a massive offseason, most notably signing Trey Turner to an 11-year deal. On top of that, I think the team did well to replace talent leaving with equal or better counterparts. It is important to remember that this team, even though this team made the World Series, they only won 87 regular season games, and I do not want to overrate this team too heavily. With all that being said, I think the team makes the jump to second within the division with a 96-66 record. With possibly the busiest offseason was the New York Mets, and I do not think it was for the better. Losing 3 crucial starters will weigh heavy on their season aspirations. While I love Steve Cohen, that he continues to invest in his team, I think the offseason was a net loss. I do like some of their signings. Obviously, Verlander is a big one, but but that is a very old 1-2 punch, and I think Kodai Senga is a massive question mark. The jump to the MLB is a very touchy thing. It feels like some people hit the ground running or crash and burn. Either way, I think this team finishes as a 92-70 team. As we move to the less hard-hitting teams of the division, I again got met with a confusing offseason. I'm still not sure how I feel about the trade of Pablo Lopez because I love the guy they got back in Luis Arias back for him. But that's still a good starter. However, if there is any team that has the ability to expend a pitcher, it is the Marlins. With that being said, the remainder of their moves were not enough to make them a horde team, but not enough to make them push past the middling team stuck in neutral. I think the team does improve slightly, but not enough to get into the playoff hunt. Last up is the Nationals, which there is not much to be said about this team. This team is really void of major league talent. They lost Nelson Cruz and Luke Voit in the offseason and brought in some aging veterans to help supplement that void. But I do not think it will matter all that much. This team is destined to finish at the bottom of the MLB in pretty much everything. In the Central, we saw a mainstay switch teams in Willson Contreras jumping ship from the Cubs to the Cardinals. Other than that, it was a really quiet offseason from the Cardinals camp. The team had a solid roster from top to bottom, and in a weaker NL Central, it is due to win the division by outright. I think the overall roster improved, but I think the Central did get a little stronger, so they finished 91-71 record. Normally, a team losing out on one of the best catchers would be significantly worse. However, the additions of Dansby Swanson, Jameson Taillon, and Trey Mancini, the Cubs are looking to jumpstart their rebuild. I love that the Cubs decided to be buyers this offseason and not just wait for their prospects to get there. I may have been a bit too aggressive with this placement, but I think this team finishes with a winning record and hits 83 wins this season. The Braves did not make the moves I thought they needed to make to continue to contend. This roster seems like it is one bad start from being blown up, and that is not a good feeling. This pitching staff is really nice. Burns and Woodruff can compete with any top 2 pitchers in baseball, but the rest of the roster is not good enough to be a playoff-level team. While they did not lose much, this team is due for some regression. I think they finished right at 500 with an 81-81 record. Coming in fourth and first in my heart is the Pittsburgh Pirates. The Pirates made some sneaky good moves this offseason in the additions of Carlos Santana and G-Man Choi, not to mention fan favorite Andrew McCutchen. They also made a good amount of effort unclogging their middle infield, including a trade of Kevin Newman to rival Cincinnati. However, much like the other bottom dwellers, the main roster lacks major league talent. Brian Reynolds is probably not going to be on the roster come opening day, and a lot of the team's success is on O'Neal Cruz and Cabrian Hayes. The troops are coming for this team, but their presence might not be felt for another couple years. Similar to the Pirates, the Reds have a lot of top talented prospects, but not very much talent is at the MLB level. Their big additions include previously mentioned Kevin Newman and Will Myers. And those are not the moves that the team needed to make to be successful in 2023. While it is void MLB level talent, they're never going to carry a roster of wins, and I think the Reds will be void of those in a big way, only finishing with 65. I would love to think the prospects will arrive and they'll make a big impact, but I think the Reds are still a couple years away. Finishing the NL West, we had the LA Dodgers, who tore up the regular season last year, but lost a lot of key pieces in the offseason. Don't get me wrong, this roster is still stacked, but it is not at the level that it was last season. Pieces like Trey Turner, Tyler Anderson, and Craig Kimbrell leaving in free agency is never going to be a thing that makes the roster better, and the Dodgers did not necessarily make efforts to fill that void. It is crazy to me to project a team to have 10 less wins and it still be above 100 wins, but that's where we are with the Dodgers finishing at 101-59. Next, I had the surprise of the regular season in the San Diego Padres. Adding Xander Bogaerts and getting Tatis back to full strength are going to be huge this season. Also, the additions of veteran pieces in Seth Lugo and Nelson Cruz give that roster that little bit of veteran leadership that can be invaluable. For me, I'm shooting big for the Padres, and I have them finally ending the Dodgers' reign in the West with a 102-58 record. I wanted to get a little spicy at some point in these predictions, and I think the Padres have a real shot to turn some heads this season. The San Francisco Giants will forever confuse me because they seem like they're trying to force a playoff window that's not there. Every season they sign some pieces that end up not making the difference that they need for the Giants to make the playoff push. I really like the pieces they brought in. Mania, Haniger, Stripling, and Conforto are all excellent pieces to add to a roster, but when the roster loses its best pitcher and arguably its best hitter, it is hard to justify. I have the Giants finishing the season at a 78-84 season. Another team that feels like it's on the verge of an absolute blow-up is the Arizona Diamondbacks. The roster has been churning disappointing results for a while now, and the prospect depth is not quite where you would like it to be. It is good for the team to acquire Gabriel Moreno from the Dalton Varsho trade this offseason, as he could be a cornerstone of the roster for years to come. Other than that, the roster is on thin ice, and I expect some players to be dealt at the deadline. Finally, are the Colorado Rockies, who are in full rebuild mode at this point. The team has lost almost all of its MLB level guys in the offseason, and I think the Rockies are due to get shelled this upcoming season. I have the Rockies finishing with the second worst record in baseball, but hey, at least they have a new lottery system, so it gives them a shot to be first in the substantial draft. Before we get into the playoffs, let's look at some regular season awards. Starting with the Manager of the Year, I looked for the managers who either did the most with the least or simply had the biggest improvements. I think the team that is going to outperform expectations the most, based on my predictions, is San Diego Padres and their manager Bob Melvin. I really think it is their year to finally break the Dodgers' grasp of the NL West. On the AL side of things, most of my playoff picture is remaining relatively the same. So I went with the only new member in the Baltimore Orioles and their manager Brandon Hyde. Making the playoffs for the first time in 7 years will help propel Hyde into the award winner. Rookie of the Year is always one of the most fun awards every season, and I think this year will be no different. They're the obvious favorites, Gunnar Henderson, Francisco Alvarez, and Tristan Casas, but I went with a different route in the AL. Once a top prospect in his own right, I'm choosing Drew Waters, who played really well in limited time for the Kansas City Royals. Combined with my prediction of the Royals' big improvement and being up at the MLB level from the beginning of the season, I think he is in a prime position to put up a year that catches some people off guard. On the National League side of things, I'm with Corbin Carroll, which is not one of my strongest beliefs in the world, but because there's a lack of protection in that Arizona lineup. I also do not think the team results will be really that great, so he'll really have to put up an impressive season to win the award. For the Cy Young, I went with back-to-back Diamondbacks with Zach Gallen winning the award. Gallen has put up great peripheral numbers for some time now, but last year put everything together to finish 5th in the Cy Young. Combined with Carroll, I think the two can be one of the only bright spots in Arizona. On the American League side of things, I had to go with Jacob deGrom with his new team, the Texas Rangers. I think deGrom's pitching in Globe Life is a match made in heaven, and if he can stay healthy, we might see some video game type numbers. And finally, for the award everyone is chasing, the MVP. For the National League and their continued success, I have Ronald Acuna Jr. of the Atlanta Braves. Losing Swanson is going to sting, and if the Braves want to remain at the tippity top of the food chain in the NL, Acuna needs to step up big. The lineup also has enough protection that allows him to have a monster year. I know it did not look the best last year, but I think a lot of that can be attributed to recovering from that ACL tear. Even if an athlete's ready to play, it can sometimes take some time to trust that knee again. As for the AL, I did not want to go with the stereotypical Judge, Ohtani, or Trout, so that left me with the next tier guys in Jose Ramirez and Vladimir Guerrero Jr. I was really torn on what to do here, but I decided to go with Vlad at the end of the day. It's incredibly difficult for Ramirez to win it out of Cleveland, and I think the Blue Jays are going to perform slightly better. For Guerrero, it's all about launch angle. This dude hits the ball as hard as anyone, and it seems his success from elite to one of the best in baseball is completely tied to launch angle. And now for the playoffs. Let's work through the AL, and then we'll move to the NL after we have a World Series representative. In the wild card, we have the Mariners and Guardians matching up in the upper bracket. This matchup would be insanely fun to watch, and truly coming up with an expert analysis at this point would be somewhat foolish. However, I will say I liked the Guardians offseason a bit better, so I'm going to go with them in a banger of a series 2-1. In the other AL wildcard matchup with the Orioles and Blue Jays. In my opinion, the Blue Jays would become heavy favorites coming in, and I think it'll show. I would love for the Orioles to make some noise in the playoffs and be that true Cinderella story, but I do not see it this year. I really hated the offseason for them, and I liked the addition of Dalton Varsho for the Blue Jays, as well as some of the veteran pitching they added. I think that'll carry them to the 2-0 victory in the series. Following the Blue Jays, they face the Astros in the divisional round. Now, hear me out. I understand the Astros are favorites coming into the series, but I think the Blue Jays are a lot closer than people realize. I really liked their offseason. I think they have a lot of upset potential here with some of the Astros offseason losses. I have it being a tight series, but I think the Blue Jays will win 3-1. I will say if it gets back to Houston for that Game 5, I would take the Astros. The other American League, the other Division League series playing out is the Yankees hosting the Guardians. The Guardians have a long history of losing to the Yankees in the playoffs, and I don't think it starts here. Well, I think the Yankees were too judge dependent last year, and they really did not do much to combat that. They just simply have a roster with too much talent to lose in the divisional round to a cheaper run Guardians. I like the Yankees to take this series 3-1 as well. With that being said, the AL down to 2 teams, the Blue Jays and Yankees. At this point, the Yankees are riding with that, it brings the AL down to 2 teams, the Blue Jays and Yankees. At this point, the Blue Jays are riding sky high on momentum. I think it carries them through the series. The Blue Jays have a really good roster, and if the pieces like Jose Barrios are firing on all cylinders, they become a really dangerous squad. Again, there is a part of me that forced this pick to be a bit different, but at the same time, I really do like the Blue Jays pound for pound in a series against the Yankees if the Jays are doing what they're capable of. I think the series will be close, but finishes 4-2. On the NL side of things, we start in a wild card round with the New York Mets versus the Cardinals. Here is where I think the Cardinals get sort of exposed for being just picking on a weaker division. I think the Mets could use that nuts 1-2 punch to a T and quickly wrap up the series 2-0. On the other side of things, we have a really good matchup in the Phillies and Dodgers. While I think the Dodgers are still a better team, it is a shorter series, and Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler going, I will go ahead and take the Phillies. This is the reigning NL pennant after all, and they did make some improvements this offseason. I have them winning 2-1. The next opponent the Phillies will face, I do not believe will be so forgiving. The Braves, in my mind, are incredibly stacked, and I think the prime Ronald Acuna Jr., I think they will be an incredibly difficult team to verse in a 5-game series. I think they win 3-2. After I've been riding so high on the Padres, I do think they struggle with the Mets in a 5-game series. While I was down on the Mets in the regular season, this is still a very good team with a lot of depth. And in this scenario, I think this shines through against the Padres as they win 3-1. Then that leaves us with a repeat series of last year in the Braves and Mets. And I think the high-flying Braves will beat the Mets 4-3. I think the Mets will do well in this series, but I think if Game 7 back in Atlanta with the surging Braves will be just enough to push them over the edge and into the World Series. And finally, I have the World Series. Blue Jays, Braves. And without further ado, I have the World Series, the 2023 World Series winner, being the Atlanta Braves in a 6-game series. Woo! Congrats to them in this completely real world that is going to happen in the following month. And just for funsies, let's have Matt Olson be the World Series MVP. Again, thank you all for watching. I know it's a bit longer of a video, but thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time.